Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Saturday, November the 29th, 2025. And we are joined again by my assistant back there, my dog Cooper, and it's his birthday today. Excuse me, he turns 3. We got some snow last night, and usually we don't get snow quite this early in the year, but it was about 5 inches, and it really blanketed the whole yard. So he's really enjoyed lounging there on the chair and then looking out at the snow. And he has some more surprises in store for him a little bit later today. As you know, if you've been following along, we've been reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and last video was a reading of Canto 5, What the Thunder Said, which is the last canto of the poem. And so today I will go through and offer some comments, observations, bits of analysis and insight, and try to, in some way, tie the poem together at the end. But I'm feeling even more today about this one than I do normally, even though I say this, that I'm just going to miss a lot of things. I'm going to leave a lot of stuff out. One, just because I'm kind of going through and commenting, but second, because it's Eliot, and Eliot is dense and difficult, and you can, I think, read him in multiple different ways, and they don't necessarily have to be complete and maximal. But nonetheless, let's begin. So the first stanza of What the Thunder Said, which comes right after the Canto 4, Death by Water, which was the shortest one and was pretty vexing. The first stanza begins with a series of anaphora, the after the, and we get images of torchlight red on sweaty faces, frosty silence in the garden, agony in stony places. And this is images of the betrayal and arrest of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. The shouting and the crying, prison, palace, and reverberation of thunder of spring over the distant mountains. So then that's from Matthew 27, the earthquake that occurs after the death and crucifixion of Christ. So that's how this canto is beginning, and it's beginning with the thunder or the earthquake being a sort of divine lamentation over the killing of divinity on earth. That's how Eliot's beginning this. And even though, like I said earlier, he's pulling from multiple different traditions of religion or traditions of spirituality or magical thinking, or however it is you want to call it, here he's going back to and relying upon the New Testament. He who was once living is now dead. I assume that refers to Christ. We who were living are now dying with a little patience. That's an interesting turn of phrase, because typically within Christian theology, it's understood that once Christ descended into hell and then rose again into heaven, that everyone who was suffering in purgatory was freed. But here it says, we who are living are now dying. Maybe that's just a way of saying that our kind of journeys towards sanctification are, that the gates of heaven are open in that way. Or perhaps it's just kind of a twisted version of what one might expect from the action of salvation here. Then we're going to return to this these images that we had at the beginning of the poem, with lots of dry land with no water. And the dry land with no water is a way of Eliot imagining no fertility, no future, no growth. Even though water can be destructive, as we've seen with death and drowning. So he says, there's no water but only rock and no water, and the sandy road, the road winding above among the mountains, which are mountains of rock without water. And if there were water, we should not stop and drink amongst the rock. One cannot stop and think. He's doing a lot of interesting kind of rhythm and repetition through here. Water, rock, water, road, mountain, rock, water, rock. And this is something that I have noticed. It's kind of pleasurable to read, for one, but it can be a little bit confusing to figure out. Like, it seems like he's spending several lines just kind of describing the same thing. It's something that I notice as well occurs in the 4 quartets, with references to time and past and present and future. And there's kind of a dance among these main images that does create, I think, an interesting rhythm or an interesting sonic quality to the poem. As we continue through here, he's describing the sterility and the silence in the mountains, but the dry, sterile thunder without rain. There is not even solitude in the mountain, but red sullen faces sneer and snarl. from the doors of mud-cracked houses. So the speaker being up or observing up in the mountains that there's kind of no one else there, that it seems like it's quiet and it seems like it's lonely, but then there's this, and it's a place where the thunder has not yet been able to penetrate yet. And if we're thinking about the thunder representing a sort of divine voice or divine message, and that people are hidden and they're kind of peering out and sneering, almost these kind of like demon-like faces that are hiding. And then we get an interesting kind of inset right after if there were water, which is right here, which reminds me of in Canto 3, the game of chess, where we get kind of the description of winding along the river, and it's set out that way. It's presented and formatted that way on the page as well. And I'm just going to read this again, even though I don't have a whole lot of comment about it, just so you can hear what I was talking about earlier with the rhythm and the musicality of the repetitions. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, a spring, a pool among the rock, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and dry grass singing, but the sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 but there is no water. So we do get the onomatopoeia, second to last line in there, but each of these images sitting along their own line, kind of being separated, punctuated, paused there. And it's as though Eliot with each one is kind of refining it, right? And no rock. If there were rock, so that's the hypothetical, and also water. Water is in the hypothetical, right? And then we get and water again. So repetition, a spring, water's turning into the spring. The image of water, right, is being turned into the spring, which is something that's flowing and something that's going on. It's creating a pool among the rock there. And now we do have a sound, but the sound only of water, not yet the thunder, also not the cicada. But then we have the dry grass singing. So it seems that if the dry grass is singing, it's harder to kind of blow dry grass together in a way that makes that kind of whoosh sound of the wind. So the dry grass singing could be perhaps in some sort of like things that humans couldn't hear, that would be in anticipation of the water, right? And then it says, but the sound of the water over the rock. So it's starting to wash away. And oh, if we had this, but then the last line is, but there is no water. And so there's this anticipation of water, which would come from thunder. Thunder usually previews or goes before, right? It's the predecessor of water, and lets us know that there's a rainstorm coming. Then we get, who is this third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together, but when I look ahead on the white road, there is another one walking beside you. And this stanza, I think, is a reference to the road to Emmaus in, I believe, the Acts of the Apostles, where there are two disciples walking along the road and they meet a stranger. They talk to the stranger about this guy they knew who was Jesus, and then they invite the stranger to come in and eat with them. And in the breaking of the bread, lo and behold, it was Jesus the whole time, right? And it says they came to know him through the breaking of the bread, that the repeating of this sacrifice, the sacrament, the symbol, is the one way that they recognize him. Otherwise, they would not have before. But here we don't get that moment. We get an allusion to it, and then we just get this, when I count, there's only you and I, but then when I look, there's footsteps of another. So it's kind of like a ghost or a spirit there. It's like an Emmaus story where you don't even really see the stranger. The presence of the stranger has to be deduced or intuited by you, because we're still kind of awaiting the word of the thunder. So it's almost as though we're going through these famous stories of salvation, but we're still being deprived of the exact main signifier, the main fulfiller of all of those things. Excuse me. So then we have a reference to, in the next stanza, the murmur of maternal lamentation, right? So that's the crying of a mother who is lamenting presumably the loss of one's child, right? This could be referring back to the Virgin Mother at the cross, right? The image of the Pietà there. Ringed by the flat horizon, what is the city over the mountain? And then cracks and reforms and bursts in violent air, falling towers. So now we have these major cities in the mountain that are, and images of them falling or being destroyed, empires falling and collapsing, giving way to time. And Eliot names several of them, right? Jerusalem as kind of the first empire, Athens as a locus of Western civilization, the birth of philosophy and democracy, Alexandria, where the great library was, Vienna, right, a center of culture, enlightenment, Renaissance, London, which was where Eliot was and is talking about through proxy throughout this whole thing, and then Unreal, he says, right? Unreal's the last one. So here I think we can understand that Unreal City stands in for all of those. Unreal City is Jerusalem and Athens and Alexandria and Vienna and London and New York City, Tokyo, Los Angeles, any sort of hub that you might think of as a center of civilization, a center of the metropolis of empire, something like that. All of these things Eliot's telling us are in a succession of their time. One is kind of just taking the place of another, and they're all going to fall. All of the cities of the modern world are going to fall, and they're all kind of tied up or represented in the things that we saw within Unreal City. Moving along here, there's a there's a line that I always love: "Bats with baby faces," and I know that that's supposed to probably mean like a full-grown bat, but with like a young bat face. But I always think of like the Gerber baby face placed on a bat, and I think that there's a reference to this line in a Patti Smith song, though I can't call it to mind right now off the top of my head. And if I remember it, I'll have to post it. But I always love that line of bats with baby faces, and the violent light whistled and beat their wings. And just the image of these bats within a cave, right, with the blackened wall and the upside down air were towers tolling reminiscent bells that kept the hours, and voices singing out at empty cisterns and exhausted wells. The bats waking up because it's the upside down world that we talked about with Unreal City, but that it's night, and those are the things that can locate when there's only the sound and there's no light there, and that's what's kind of emerging then is these bats. We get more images here of decayed hole among the mountain, the faded moonlight, the grass is singing over tumbled graves above the chapel. There is an empty chapel, only the wind's home. So the tumbled graves then, old images of death are falling over and are being conquered by the act of salvation that's happened, right? Like the split in the temple that's described. Dry bones can harm no one. Now, earlier we had all these focuses on and references of dry bones, right? The bones, the pearls that were his eyes, the bones in Rat's Alley that the rats were clinking along, and all of this dryness in the rock and the mountain that we've been described, that have been described to us, now are sort of losing their power as the harbingers of like the drawing away of life, the drawing away of fertility and regeneration. And then we get the Cocorico, which is another kind of onomatopoeia of this bird. I don't know if it's supposed to be a rooster. I'm not really sure. And the flash of lightning, then a damp gust bringing rain. And now we finally get the water, right? The lightning that comes with the thunder. And now the water is finally coming that we've been waiting for so long. And it's such a flood-like torrential downpour that it says Ganga was sunken. So that's the Ganges River is sunken. And to sink a river, you really have to, that's again paradoxical. Things could sink in a river, things could sink in an ocean. You can't really sink an ocean. So I think that's just letting us know how much of a torrential downpour we're getting here, that it's overflowing the banks, that it's almost like another flood. The limp leaves waited for the rain. Remember the limp leaves from earlier that were kind of like holding on, scratching down, refusing to let go, because it was all those damp leaves that we talked about. And then the black clouds gather, the jungle's crunched, humped in silence. So as the water's beginning to fall, everything is kind of like clenched together and waiting for something. And then it says, then spoke the thunder. And this whole canto is what the thunder said. The thunder is kind of the voice of transcendent, the voice of that great other. And we get three instances of what it says. Every time it begins with a da, which is kind of an onomatopoeia for thunder, and then we get data, dayatvam, and damayata. And I apologize for mispronouncing those. But in addition to the da acting as a kind of onomatopoeia for the thunder that's there, it is, as we're told from the note from the Upanishads, there is this enigmatic, God presents three sets of disciples with enigmatic signal da, challenging each group to understand it. Each group is posed to understand the syllable at the root of a different imperative. So the da begins as an imperative. So it's kind of like God's like, and then goes with the first one. And the first line we get in 401, data, what have we given? And so the note tells us data is give to men who are avaricious, right? So it asks you, what have we given? My friend, blood shaking my heart, the awful daring of a moment's surrender, which an age of prudence can never retract. And that line comes from Canto 5 of the Inferno. So it's thinking about, what have you given to others that even when you have been resourceful and not wasteful yourself is still like to save for oneself and to not be indulgent is not enough when your commandment is to give to and to care about others. By this, and this only we have existed, which is not to be found in our obituaries. So the things that keep you alive and that give meaning and substance and depth to your life are those things that you have given and supplied to others, the differences that you've made for other people. And those are the things that don't pop up in your obituary. You think about your obituary, it's your time and place of birth, time and place of death, cause of death, the people that you were related to that you left behind. Maybe, so-and-so worked 35 years at Liberty Mutual or, whatever it is, right? He liked basketball, cooking, and fishing for lobster, whatever it is. But what it's suggesting here is those things that are your reaction to the commandment of what have you given. Those are the things that actually make up the meaning of your life and your existence, and they cannot be contained within your obituary. They are not the basic facts of your life, but they are the truth of your life. Moving along then, we talk about empty seals broken, and that is another reference, I think, to Revelation, right? The breaking of the 7 seals. We get the second commandment, the dayatvam, and the dayatvam is supposed to be compassion to the demons who are cruel. Commanding people to give compassion to the demons who are cruel, which I am not an expert in the Upanishads. I've not read them, but I'm wondering if it means not just evil people on the world, but also the temptations that you have within yourself. If we understand demons metaphorically, your weaker human sides, right? To have compassion towards those things, to not really rack yourself with guilt too much about that. And the description we get afterward here is, I have heard the key turn in the door once and turn once only, which is again a reference to Inferno. So we're talking about people being kind of trapped in a place of suffering, in a place of burning. We think of the key, each in his prison. Thinking of a key, each confirms a prison. And then it says, only at nightfall ethereal rumors revive for a moment a broken Coriolanus. So each of the people, when you hear the key turn, when you feel like you're on the precipice of being freed from your isolation and your punishment and your solitude, knowing that you're that close and knowing that you are imagining your freedom, you confirm that you are within the prison, that you are isolated, that you are trapped, that you're being deprived of something. And then this reference to Coriolanus is interesting. I'm not totally sure what to do with it, but that's from Shakespeare's play of the Roman war hero who defied public opinion and ended his life leading a foreign army against Rome. The note just tells us another image of isolation. So maybe it's somebody who was important to their city, their people, their place, and their time, and through the commitments that they have for ambition or duty, alienates and isolates themselves from the greatness that they could have had. So perhaps it's his ambition that makes him think of that key that's described within this stanza. And then we get the final command from the thunder, da damayata, which is the control for the gods who are naturally unruly. Control, it says, which is interesting because then the only bit after this we get is, the boat responded gaily to the hand expert with sail and oar. The sea was calm. Your heart would have responded gaily when invited, beating obedient to controlling hands. So we get controlling in the last line there, the controlling hands of kind of riding the boat. So give, have compassion, have control are the two commandments that the thunder gives here. And then we break for a bit and we get this first person I sat upon the shore, which I don't think we're to understand to be Eliot, but is just kind of another speaker here. Fishing, and with the arid plain behind me, shall I at least set my lands in order? And that's a reference to Ezekiel, setting your affairs in order. Then we get, so the person's fishing, right? And I guess setting my lands or affairs in order before I die, before I pass on. Not really sure here. We get that line of London Bridge is falling down, which is that children's nursery rhyme, but it's also, I think, kind of nefarious in the juxtaposition there, because we know from reading about all the locations throughout the wasteland, but also this unreal city, that the falling down at the break of thunder or the earthquake could actually be apocalyptic. And then to have the kind of children's rhyme being there to describe it is, I think, a little bit sinister. Then we have two instances of non-English languages that I butchered. The first one is from Canto 26 of the Purgatorio. It says, "Then he hid himself in the fire that refines them." So this should take us back to the idea of the fire sermon, but also the burning in Carthage from St. Augustine. The fire that refines and that strengthens is the fire that purifies. So that's purgation, right? And then the other one is, "When shall I be like a swallow?" which is a reference to the Philomela story, which was used earlier in the Wasteland. And I think it's because Philomela then is transformed into a swallow, transformed into a bird, the symbol of some freedom to get away from the condition of the assault that happened to Philomela. The next line is, "The Prince of Aquitaine of the ruined tower." That's in French. The only thing I really know what to do with that is, I think we had a reference to Aquitaine earlier. I don't remember exactly where it was, but ruined tower continues this image we're having of all of these great symbols of empire and of city and of modernism and modernity falling, crashing to the ground because of the intervention of kind of the religious back into the secular world. I really love this line at 4:30. "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean, but what I love about it is, I think that's almost a moment of the poet kind of peeking in and telling you right before it's over, hey, you know, all these things that you've been trying to trace throughout this entire poem, all these references to Dante and Shakespeare and Hesse and Huxley and tarot cards and the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, all of these things that I'm collecting in here, and all these languages that you probably don't speak, but that I, T.S. Eliot, do. I'm collecting them like fragments, and I think of that almost as sticks, right? In order to kind of bolster or surround myself, to shore up against my ruin. These are the things that are holding me in and holding me together and holding me as one. Otherwise, I too will dissolve and will fragment. Will kind of be washed away or eroded away by water, for example. And what I think is really interesting about that is that speaks, I think, to me so truthfully about the condition of being a modern person in this world, that there are so many things. Eliot was talking about, you know, the cataclysms of the war and of technology, but I believe that now, you know, we don't have within London, for example, this great war that London is involved in, but we do have this continual datafication of things, assault on truth, lack of compassion for humanity, and embrace of technologies like artificial intelligence that are dissolving our humanity and sacrificing the things that make us unique, critical thinkers, creative people, compassionate. We're just offloading those, and we're surrendering all of those. And again, with the constant datafication, the constant demands on our attention, the constant demands on our money, the inability to actually have compassion for every single person who is suffering the whole world over, because you just can't contain all of that within yourself. But then there's also that added feeling of guilt that goes with it for not feeling badly enough or doing badly enough for the people that need you. All of those things, I think, are things that fragment us and that pull us apart and that make us feel spread, sprinkled, disintegrated. And the poet here is saying, I've taken these fragments to try to shore myself up against ruin. What do I have? And for him, and maybe for us, I have art, I have tradition, I have texts, I have culture, I have history, I have civilization, and all of those things that have produced me as a historical self are the things that I'm using, hopefully, to hold myself together in this modern world that none of us are really ready for or completely understand. And I think that that really gets to the heart of what this poem is about. We have a couple more lines, right? Well, then I'll fit you Hieronymo's Mad Again, which comes from Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy. The subtitle is Hieronymo's Mad Again, and it tells us Hieronymo, driven mad by the murder of his son, stages a play in which he convinces the murderers to act a part. In the course of the play, Hieronymo actually kills the murderers and then himself. I think Eliot's giving us this illusion really quickly at the end of the inability to distinguish between art and life, but theaters of violence and actual violence. In what ways are we deceived into playing parts that are going to be our own destruction and ruin? But it's important that it's an illusion right after this line of fragments I have shorn up against my own ruin. Then we get a repetition of data, dayata, damyata, which are the three commands of the thunder. So the thunder speaks again, or at least echoes again in our mind. And we're left at the end with shanti, 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 which I'm told is the word for peace, but repeated 3 times means something like, I wish you peace beyond all understanding. And what's really nice about that is those are the last 3 words that end the film Children of Men from 2006 by Alfonso Cuarón, which I think is one of the best films I've ever seen. And it's not directly based on The Wasteland because there's not really a plot in here, so to speak, but it is... you would see a lot of tone, atmosphere, spirit, ideas, reaching for, longing for, yearning for the transcendent and the divine and the miraculous within the everyday. Certain images and lines, the idea that history and civilization and the past and art and the great traditions from Picasso to Pink Floyd are the things that can kind of shore us up against our ruin. So there's a lot in there as well. And it ends with those last lines of, I wish you peace beyond all understanding, which I think is both a blessing, but also a kind of, a little bit of a hang in there. Because even this poem can't really... I think Eliot would say that the poem doesn't accomplish the thing that he wishes it could do, because it quite simply can't. But one has to try, and one has to speak even the failure of it into existence. And I think this poem really pushes for the extent of what art and what poetry are able to do in a world that's becoming increasingly disenchanted. And I think that's why it still speaks to us so heavily today. That's all I'm going to say with The Wasteland. I love The Wasteland. I could see, if I keep doing this for a while, revisiting The Wasteland at some point. It is one of those that certain things stick with me over time, but also there are certain things that each time I read it, based on just how you change as a reader, but also how I change as a person, I notice different things. And I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, I wish you peace.